Greetings. Nizz Realty Incorporated is our brokerage, and in this video we're going to be discussing how to draft and fill out the residential lease contract for an apartment or unit in a multifamily rental housing other than a duplex. This contract is basically a contract to lease for when your tenant is going to be renting in a condominium, an apartment, anything that's really not a single family home or a duplex, something of that nature. It's usually a unit within a building or a community in most situations, such as an apartment or condominium. So let's get straight into it and start discussing how to fill out this particular contract. In the beginning, it's similar to the single family home contract, is there's a non-lawyer disclosure. And here you want to basically fill out your name here if you're the real estate licensee, which is the real estate agent, and you're going to be representing the landlord or the tenant. This is just non-lawyer disclosure, and basically let's say our real estate licensee is, let's say it's Adam Doe today. So you put your name here in all these spots. Then you're going to have the landlord or the tenant, whoever you are representing, check mark this I can read English section, or they'll check mark this section here if they don't speak English. Then you, the real estate agent, is going to sign here. Then you'll have the landlord or tenant sign here. Very simple form here in the beginning. Now we get into the actual lease contract. So let's start filling out this lease contract. In the beginning here, it's going to be discussing the terms and the parties involved. So this is a lease for a period of, depending on how many months. Let's say this is not going to exceed 1 year. It's a standard 12-month contract, which is 1 year. And it's going to begin on, let's say, the 1st of November. Now, if it's going to last a year, you're going to have it expire next year in 2021 on the 31st of October. That is the correct way to do this. It's going to expire on the 31st at midnight. You're not really supposed to put November 1st, 2021 there. That's technically the incorrect way to do this. You want to have it done the 1 day behind. In this case, it's the 31st, and it's going to expire at midnight. So that's a typical mistake a lot of realtors make. So I'm letting you know in this video now so you don't make that mistake and do it the correct way. You always go 1 day backwards. If it starts on the 5th, then you have it end on the 4th. So for this particular contract, it's ending on the 31st of next year. The next part here is the name of the owner of the property. This is where you would have the landlord's name here, whether it's a company or their name. For this particular contract, let's just say John Doe is the owner of the property and the landlord, and the tenant is right below that. Let's just say the tenant's name is going to be Mary Apples. We'll put a name there for that. The next part here is you'll fill out the landlord's email address and phone number, and the same with the tenants, just for communication purposes. In case you're going to have emails going back and forth, or phone number, text messages, you have that all in the contract that's signed by both parties to verify that this is their contact information. So you'll fill this out accordingly. For now, we're going to leave this blank, but make sure you fill it out. It's good to not leave this blank. Next, we're going to talk about the property rented. We're going to go into the unit number. If there is one, let's say the unit number is 215 for this particular property. We're just making it up as we go. And the street address, let's say it's 123 Happy Drive, let's say this time, in Sunrise, Florida, 33323. If there's a name of the apartment or the condominium, let's say, let's call it Happy Condos, whatever the name of the community is called. For this particular one, we're going to name it that, and whatever city it's located in. For this one, it's Sunrise, and down here you'll have the zip code. Since in this particular contract it says the city here and the zip code here, you could technically leave this out up here, and but I like to fill it in just to keep it there. It just looks better when you write the full address here, and then just fill it in accordingly as you go down the list here. And the next paragraph down here is the following furniture and appliances included. So this is where you would include, let's say, a refrigerator or an oven range, washer, anything. If there's furniture included, maybe 2 couches, couple TVs, you fill it out here accordingly, and if it all can't fit, then you'll make it a separate addendum or write something as we usually do, like an Exhibit A, and attach it to this contract and fill out the inventory list of what's being included in this particular lease. For now, let's just leave it at this and move on to the rest of the contract. The next part we discuss here is the rent payments and charges. So here you'll discuss, the tenant shall pay rent for the premises in installments of however much it is. Let's say for this particular property we're paying $1,000 a month. $1,000 each on the, let's say, the first day of each, whatever it is, month, week. For this particular contract, most of the time rent is paid monthly, so we'll say month. So on the first, it's going to be paid $1,000 every month. And you fill this out accordingly depending on what your contract is. If it's going to be paid on the 15th, whatever the case may be. Usually the easiest way is whatever the move-in date is. Let's say the move-in date was the 15th. Make the rent due on the 15th, so they'll move in on the 15th of November, and then the next month, the 15th of December is when the next rent payment is due. If there's an amount of taxes being payable, like usually taxes are involved. If there's a seasonal rental, something less than 6 months, then you'll have to fill that out from there. For now, we're going to leave that blank. The amount of each installment of rent plus taxes for the lease period. Most of the time you leave this blank unless you're getting involved with taxes, which is usually only for seasonal rentals if it's less than 6 months. For now, we're going to leave this blank. If you are doing a seasonal rental and have questions about this, feel free to contact me, and I'll be more than happy to assist you with discussing this particular part here. The next part here. Unless this box is checked, the lease payments must be paid in advance beginning on whatever date. So, if you do check this box, there's going to be advance payments. Most of the time you leave this box unchecked because it's just going to be paid whatever the amount is monthly. You're not paying the entire rent all up front. So most of the time you just leave this particular area blank and move on to the next part. If the tenancy starts on a day other than the first day of the month or designated above, then the rent shall be prorated. Most of the time, I leave this blank here also. I usually don't prorate the rent. Most of the time, landlords just, if they move in on the 10th, then the rent is due on the 10th of every day of the month instead of prorating it and, making it a little bit more complicated to prorate the rent for that month, then have the rent due on the 1st of next month and each month after that. Some landlords, they just want the rent due on the 1st of the month, and that's how they want it. Even if the tenant moves in on the 20th or the 31st, they want the rent due on the 1st. That's when they want to receive their payment or whatever date that they want. If a landlord doesn't want to cooperate and that's the case, then you'll have to fill this out. I suggest trying to see if they'll just deal with having the rent paid on the day they move in, but sometimes people want to make things complicated and don't want to cooperate, which is understandable. If that's how they want their rent to be paid, then they're the landlord of the property. I guess they have the right to that, so that's the way it'll have to be. If you do run into that situation and you're not sure how to fill this out, feel free to contact me. I'll show you how to fill this out and prorate the rent amount. For now, let's move on and say this particular landlord is willing to cooperate and have it paid on the day that they move in, which is the 1st. The next paragraph discusses deposits. A security deposit, let's say the security deposit is going to be $1,000. Oop, not 10,000, only 1,000. Sometimes if you want a bigger security deposit, you could put that there too. Maybe you want double security deposit, you'd write 2,000 or whatever double rent is. Then you could write the advance rent here. This is where if you want first, last, and security, so this could be marked if you want last month's rent, $1,000 for a rental period of, you could say here like last month's rent or whatever month it is that you're going to be putting it in there. For this particular contract, let's say we're going to have that. A pet deposit, you'd mark this if there's a pet deposit. A late charge, if there's going to be a late charge for missing the rent payment. Let's say a late charge is, let's say it's going to be like $30, nothing too crazy. More than 3 days after the date of it being due. A bad check, let's say the tenant writes a check that bounces. You can make a fee for that. not to exceed $20 or 5% of the lease payment. You could say maybe if they write a bad check, you charge them $10 or something. It's always good to fill these two in, just to have something there, just to fill it in, not leave it blank, and just have some type of penalty for if they are going to be late and so forth. And anything other that you're going to include here, most of the time I just leave this blank, but if you are doing something special, then you would fill it in here. And if you are in a situation where you do have to fill something special in, feel free to contact me if you have further questions on how to fill this out. Let's say there's also a pet deposit for this particular lease. Say there's a $200 pet deposit just to fill this out. If there's no pets involved, you leave this blank and unchecked. So that's how you fill out the deposits, and let's move on to the next paragraph. Let's say you're the listing agent and you're representing the landlord, then you put your name here. I think we said earlier in the contract that Adam Doe was the licensee involved here. And all notices to landlord and all lease payments must be sent to landlord's agent. This is if you want if you're the real estate agent or licensee that's managing this particular property for the landlord, or the go-to individual for collecting rent, and if there's any issues, then you'd write it here and you'd have the address, and if they're going to be mailing a check. Most of the time that I usually see in rentals today is the landlord gives the tenant their bank account number, and the tenant's required to either electronically transfer the funds or go down to the bank and make a deposit directly into the landlord's account. But sometimes maybe the landlord wants a check mailed to their address. It all depends. You'd fill this out though if this is the case where the agent is going to be collecting the rent and wants it mailed to them. Most of the time I usually don't fill this out, and it's actually sent directly into the landlord's bank account. So fill this out if you're going to be collecting the rent and doing something of that nature. If not, just leave it blank. Let's say for this particular contract, the landlord is going to be collecting the rent through a deposit directly in the landlord's bank account. So we'll leave this blank. But if you need to fill this in, fill it in. As we continue through the contract here. Unless this box is checked, landlord may adopt, modify, or repeal rules and regulations for the use of the common areas. So you check this box. If the landlord's going to adopt and modify things, this really depends on the contract, if you're going to be doing this or not, or the landlord's going to be participating in this type of activity. Most of the time I leave this box unchecked, but if that's not the case and the landlord's going to adopt and modify things of the common area and so forth, then you check mark that box. If you're unsure about this, feel free to contact me, talk about it. For right now, we're going to leave it blank. The next paragraph here discusses overnight guests and how long they should be able to stay. This is really completely up to the realtor and the landlord what they're going to discuss this about. Feel free to put a number here depending on what you're doing, what the landlord wants. We'll just say for this contract's sake something like 7 days, but it's completely up to the landlord. Maybe they don't mind if somebody stays for 30, 60 days or whatever the case may be. You fill this box in accordingly. This next box here is talking about the pet deposit. You check this box if it pertains to the contract, and the next box is talking about smoking in the premises. Once again, you check box this if it pertains to the contract. If you have questions about this, feel free to contact me. We're going to leave these blank because we're considering the pets and smoking is not permitted. Actually, we'll maybe check this one because I think we did say we're going to have a pet deposit. So we're going to leave it like that. Next paragraph is just discussing things. Tenant may not make any alterations or improvements to the premises without first obtaining landlord's written consent of alteration. However, if this box is checked, tenant may hang pictures and install windows. So this is once again pertaining to specific contracts. You check this if you want the tenant to either usually do these type of things, hang pictures and so forth. I usually just leave this blank. It's usually not a big issue and so forth, but if you do need to check this box, then you go ahead and do that and move on to the next part of the paragraph. It really just depends on the contract. I believe we leave this one blank because the pet deposit has been paid. So we're just going to leave that blank. If you need to fill these in or have questions about it, feel free to contact me and we'll go forward from there. Most of the time I don't check these boxes. Maintenance. This is what the landlord is responsible for and the tenant. You check these as accordance with the contract and what you're looking to do. Whoever's responsible for what that you're going through here. Maybe the tenant's responsible for the smoke detectors and maintenance of them. Maybe the landlord's responsible for having an exterminator and the tenant's responsible for the keys. Maybe the landlord's responsible here for clean outside, garbage removal. Let's say the landlord's responsible for that. Running water, that's the tenant's responsibility. Hot water, landlord. Lawn, landlord. Heat, air conditioning maintenance. Furniture, let's say the tenant's responsible for that. Appliances, landlord. Fixtures, landlord. Let's say you fill this out how you're drafting your contract and what exactly is going to be done and who's responsible for what. This varies from contract to contract. I'm just going to mark this up as what are things that I usually have seen where the landlord takes care of and things that the tenant usually takes care of. If there's anything else extra, you mark this other and fill it in here accordingly. This next paragraph discusses landlord shall be responsible for major maintenance or major replacement of equipment, except for equipment which tenant has accepted responsibility for major maintenance. In the previous paragraph, this is you just fill in amounts, basically what the landlord is required to do once the repair cost exceeds a certain amount. So let's say once it exceeds $100, the landlord has to get involved and help out with the repairs and so forth. This is really completely contingent on what you're doing and the amount that the landlord wants. So you'll fill this in as it varies from contract to contract. For now, we're going to leave it at $100. So anything less than $100, the tenant's going to be taken care of, such as air conditioned filters. The tenant's going to replace those. If they lose some keys to the door, to the unit, or to the pool, maybe it's like $20 for a new key from the community, so they're responsible for that. That's something the landlord's not going to pay for. But if the air conditioner breaks, obviously that's a big expense. It's going to be over $100, so the landlord's going to be paying for that. The next part is discussing utilities down here. What's usually included in the lease. Maybe there's certain like the HOA fees, maybe the pool maintenance, or maybe water is included. You really just fill out here what's included in the lease term, if there is anything included. Maybe garbage removal and so forth. A lot of that's discussed up here and so forth, of who's responsible, but some things that aren't. It's always good to put in here what is going to be taken care of by the landlord and included in the lease. Maybe there's electricity included, or oil, gas, sewer. You just fill it in here. For right now, we're going to leave it at this and move on to the next paragraph. Unless this box is checked, tenant may not assign this lease. Usually I never touch this box. Most landlords don't want the tenant assigning the lease to somebody else, so I've really never checked this box, but depends what you're looking to do. Most of the time we're just going to skip over that and it's not going to be checked. Approval contingency. This is if there's a homeowners association or condo association. Usually there is when you're dealing with an apartment or condo complex, something with a unit. So this is basically saying who's going to pay for the application to the association. Usually the tenant always pays it, so we're going to leave it there. But if that's not the case, you fill it as accordance with the contract. If the lease is not terminated, if there's a security deposit basically here that's asking at the end of the paragraph, usually the tenant also pays the security deposit by the association. Almost always the landlord's going to ask for a security deposit. For this particular contract, we wrote, the monthly rent's $1,000, so the landlord wants $1,000 in security deposit, and maybe the homeowners association wants $500 in security deposit. Most situations, the tenant's going to make that security deposit, but not always. Most of the time, though, that I've seen, the tenant does, so they'll give the landlord in this particular contract $1,000 security, and then they'll pay an extra $500 to the association to hold on to as an additional deposit for the association. So for this particular contract, we're going to leave it at tenant. That's usually how I see it. However, it could change depending on what you're looking to do or your particular contract. The next part is lead-based paint. If the property is built, on 1978 or before that, you need to fill this part out. If the property is, built anytime after that, 1979 or older, then you don't have to worry about this paragraph. But let's say this property was built in 1978 or 1975, then you have to check this, and you have to fill this out. And it's very important that you fill this out if this is the situation, that the property is built, and you have to give this disclosure. The next part, you have to have the landlord, who is the lessor, check mark here what the situation is, whether they know about lead-based paint in the unit, or if they have no knowledge, or if the leaser has provided the leasee with all available records. This really just depends. A lot of the times, if it is built before then, most situations that I've dealt with, the landlord doesn't have any knowledge of lead-based paint. But if they do, then you check one of these other boxes here. But for most time, they have no knowledge. And then you'll have the landlord initial here, and you're going to want them to initial here. Very important that they initial these two parts, and you fill out, so it's these two here, either they know about something or they don't know. We're going to say in this contract that the landlord doesn't know. And then the next part here, if they did know about something, then they're going to provide all available records and reports to the tenant. And if they don't know, like we marked here, they're going to say that they have no reports or records. And then you're going to have them initial here. This is where the landlord initials, and here. Very important. If you have questions about this, contact me. This is a very important paragraph that should be filled out correctly. Then the next part here is the leasee's acknowledgement. This is the tenant. The tenant has the initial here next. The initial part C here. If they received copies and all the information above, really you have them initial here always, regardless if there is, even if in this situation that the landlord doesn't know anything, you still have them initial here so that they, received and understand the information above. And you want to give them that pamphlet, which is protect your family from lead in your home. If you have questions on how to obtain this pamphlet, I could give you a copy of it. It's important you give them a copy too, whether it's by email or in person. So the tenant initials here and here. So remember, the landlord initials here and here. If they don't know anything, you mark this box, and then the tenant initials here and here. Then you, as the agent filling out this contract and drafting it for them, you initial here. And then everyone signs and dates down here. You sign it, date it. The tenant, who is the lessee, signs and dates, and the landlord, who is the lessor, signs and dates. This is a very important part of the paragraph, this contract. If you were in the situation where the property was built in 1978 or before, so fill this out correctly. And if you have questions, please contact me. This is an important section of the contract. Let's move on from here. We're at the end of the contract now. The last part here is the tenant's personal property in case of surrender or an abandonment. You want the tenants to always initial here in case of this particular situation. I've never personally seen this ever happen, but if it ever does, you should have this initialed so in case this does happen. If you have questions about this, feel free to contact me and I'll explain further. But you can read this paragraph. It's pretty important that all the tenants initial here in case of surrender or abandonment. And then the last part is for everyone to sign and date the contract. Make sure all the landlords, whoever owns the property, signs and dates. Make sure all the tenants sign and date. And if you put your name here as the real estate licensee, our brokerage name here. So let's say, the business name. And you put the address here and the phone number down here. Just fill this out. Don't leave it blank. It's pretty good to put it here. Then the next part of the contract is the early termination fee and liquidated damages. This particular part of the contract, you usually want to fill out for the landlord. This is in case the tenant wants to break the contract early. I always usually have them check mark this, and whatever the amount is. Let's say the rent was $1,000 a month, so you put whatever here as long as it doesn't exceed 2 months' rent to break the contract. We'll say 2 months rent in this particular contract is $2,000, so the landlord wants $2,000 to break this contract lease early. Let's say 4 months into the contract, something happens and the tenant has to vacate the premises and leave for whatever reason. They could break the contract early by paying this amount and being released from the contract. It's usually good, so there's some way to break the contract, with payment. And you have it, once again, everyone's sign and date, and then an initial down here on every page, and that's pretty much it. The rest of the contract is just really disclosures and bylaws. You could read through this as you'd like, but really it's just about initialing at the end of each page. It's very important. A lot of realtors, they'll miss out, or they won't have the landlord or tenant initial each page. It's very important. There's 18 pages to this contract. If the tenant misses one of the pages, let's say page 13 isn't initialed, that's a problem. You need to make sure that they initial every single page, everyone, whoever many owners there are, the landlord. If there's 2 landlords, 3, everyone has to initial down here. If there's 5 tenants, every tenant has to initial down here. Every single page. Make sure you don't miss this, and make sure they sign and date in every single part of the contract. I know it sounds a little bit silly and redundant, but a lot of realtors miss out on these things, and it's completely unacceptable. Everyone has to initial every single page when the contract is executed, and everyone has to sign and date in every single page here. It's very important that you fill that out correctly. And that's pretty much it for this contract. The only thing that wasn't in this contract that is in the single family home contract, the lease, is a section talking about the real estate commissions. That's the only thing that's different about this particular residential lease contract. I think it's really important to have a paragraph discussing your commission and obligating somebody to pay your commission, especially if you're not the listing agent and you're working with a separate, someone else's listing. There's nothing in writing that shows that you're due how much commission. So I'd recommend drafting up a separate addendum that talks about the commission, like in the single-family home contract lease, and sign that addendum and so forth, and have it explain exactly how much commission is going to who and specify the amounts. Perhaps I'll make another video in the future about that, and I'll show you how to adopt that to this particular contract. But for right now, this is this contract and how to fill it out. It's not too long. If you had any questions about it, feel free to contact me. I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. I hope this video was helpful, and we'll see you in the next one.